So first of all, thanks a lot for agreeing to talk to us.
You're welcome.
Economic Advisory Council Chairman Vivek Debroy recently said that the government was losing revenue due to the GST, which should be revenue neutral with a single rate. So, is that a view that you also share?
No, I have to go into the details of what he said. I think probably what he had in mind, as I said, I have to read carefully what he said. Haven't yet read the report that the EAC PM has written. Their point is that I think the revenue neutral rate was originally closer to 15% when the GST came into force in 2017. But now I think it has come down by 3 percentage points or so. It is somewhere between 11 and 12%. I think that is what he had in mind.
Yes.
That the various
exactly. That's what he actually meant.
the various exemptions have brought down the revenue neutral rate lower. So the effective GST rate has come down, and that is what he had in mind, which I think is a legitimate point to make.
Okay. So, will it be a situation where the government will go to a single rate of GST?
No, that will be difficult for me to say at this stage. Yeah.
Okay. So, you cautioned that short-term economic prospects of India is good and growth will be steady in the medium term, upwards of 6%. But beyond 2030, there are some major challenges. So, could you please elaborate what are the issues that the country should address now so that we can sustain our growth?
No, I think our growth rate is indeed sustainable. It can last very well at the rate of around 6.5% averaging per annum in real terms until the end of this decade. Afterwards, if we have to sustain that or even go one step further to increase the growth rate, there are several things that we need to do internally. Of course, external factors are not in our control. I'll come to that later. Internally, obviously, we have to make sure that the education and skilling of young Indians is appropriate and that they are more and more employable. We have improved a lot. We've come a long way. Earlier, for example, only 1/3 of the graduates coming out of our colleges were employable. Now the number has gone up to 50%. But it needs to improve even further. And there are skill shortages in several sectors, which means the young graduates coming out of certain specializations are not yet employable. So that needs to change. The second thing I would like to stress is that India has to take its health and fitness seriously. The Indians have to take their health and fitness seriously. We are making some of the mistakes that the West made and is now coming out of it. We don't have to go through the same cycle of learning. We can learn from their mistakes. I think consumption of junk foods, sugar-rich food, or drinks, and then giving less importance to physical activity. All these things, I think we need to make sure that we don't repeat the cycle of the Western economies. I think because only a healthy economy can be a productive economy, but only a healthy citizen can be a productive citizen, which in turn will lead to potential growth. So I have touched upon two issues, education and health. The third issue is more important, is we have to ensure energy security for our growth. The renewable energy emphasis and energy transition are important, but energy security is more important. And if these three things are addressed by all levels of government, not just the union government, and also by the citizens themselves, then the growth will sustain. Externally, of course, we have to keep an eye on geopolitical conflicts. If geopolitical conflicts become if they worsen, then we cannot control it, and there will be consequences arising out of that, such as trade disruption. The flow of raw materials will be disrupted. That we cannot control. We have to deal with them as they arise.
Exactly. So that's one question I wanted to ask you about, because if the Israel-Palestine conflict situation, continues for a long time, how would it impact India's long-term economic growth plans also? Because Israel is like a major player for our plans.
At this stage, I don't think it is something that will have a very direct bearing on us unless it disrupts global crude oil supplies in a big way. If anything, in the last 1.5 months since the situation worsened between Israel and Hamas, the oil price has come down quite a bit. In fact, Brent crude, which very closely tracks the Indian crude oil basket, is now just barely above $80 per barrel as of Friday, November 17. So it has come down after the conflict started rather than going up. So in that sense, I think for us to say that it will have a major bearing on the Indian economy requires a lot of assumptions, which may be far-fetched at this stage.
So, are we facing a situation where, despite having a good growth rate, we are falling to create jobs, especially for young Indians?
That is not true at all. If you look at the periodic labor force survey, the unemployment rate for Indian youth has come down from 17% to 10%. I don't really understand why we have such a great reluctance to take the periodic labor force survey seriously. India's unemployment rate, which went up during COVID times, has come down substantially, both with respect to rural employment, urban employment, with respect to youth employment. All these things are expanding. Therefore, the unemployment rates are coming down. Whether it is rural, urban, female, young population, all unemployment rates are declining and have come a long way off from the COVID times. So Indian economy is creating jobs. I can see the optimism about job creation among households when I look at the RBI survey of consumer confidence. That optimism by households is matched by the willingness of the industry to hire. That also comes through very clearly in the industrial outlook survey of the RBI. And if you look at the listed companies in India, both private sector and public sector listed companies, together the job growth in listed companies was about 8% in FY22, was around 5% in FY23, with good wage growth and compensation growth as well. So I think there is a widespread misperception that the Indian economy, which is recovering from COVID, is not creating jobs. That is not true. Data tells us that economy is indeed creating jobs, which will only pick up in the coming years.
Yes. So, there are multiple states which are in neck deep debt. So, how much would you attribute the freebie culture for this situation? Also, some of the states argue that the union government is trying to undermine their fiscal freedom also. So, your comments about it?
No, I think at the end of the day, the goods and services tax, which states used to levy, has grown much faster than what the individual state sales tax revenues themselves used to do. That is why this argument is no longer being raised. And states still have ability to levy taxes on property, increase user charges, and petroleum products are still outside the GST framework, alcohol. So these are all outside the GST framework, and states have scope to improve their fiscal situation by taking decisions on areas where they still have control. So they first need to demonstrate that they have fully utilized and tapped all the sources of revenue that they can raise on their own before they can complain that their scope, their revenue generation scope has been curtailed. So that is not the case yet. And whether the deficits are widened because of the freebie culture, it is difficult to make off-the-cuff statements unless one has a very clear decomposition of what has caused the debts in some states to raise. I think by and large, I think the fiscal deficit of state governments is well below 3%. And debt ratios in some states are a cause for concern, but we need to understand what is causing that debt burden to raise, whether it is a freebie culture or whether it is due to a failure to raise user charges on key consumption items, utilities, and whether it is due to non-revision of property index values or property tax rates, etc. One has to go into the detail before making any statement that it is due to a particular
Some
factor.
of these states have complaints about central government stopping the GST compensation.
I think that is something that the GST Council will deliberate upon. I think it was originally meant for 5 years, and I think the GST as a indirect tax revenue system has proven its mettle. It has come of age, and the actual revenue growth has been rising year after year. So the average collection. So in that sense, this may be a very moot point.
Okay. So, now we are going into an election phase also. So recently, the Morgan Stanley made an observation that any surprise outcome in the general elections is likely to have implications for growth and macro stability also. So, would you be able to give us a
No,
comment?
I think it is too premature to comment on that.
Okay. So, we have announced big commitments in relation to our green transitioning also, and we are in track to achieve them also. But as a country that started the industrialization late, like what are the challenges we are facing now on balancing our industrial growth as well as our green
I
commitment?
think so far we have done very well, much better than others. In fact, a report by the International Finance Corporation released early in October does talk about the fact that among the G20 countries, India has made the biggest advancement in terms of shift to renewable energy compared to its fair share contribution. So, in that sense, India is well ahead of many other countries in its energy transition. So far it has not come in the way of industrialization, it has facilitated it. But this is, but of course, going forward, if as the share of renewable energy or non-fossil fuel energy increases in proportion in the overall energy mix of India, there will be challenges because, and this is not a challenge faced only by India, it is a challenge faced by many countries, including advanced countries. Grid stability, battery storage, and availability of critical minerals and rare earths, which are needed for renewable energy, etc. All these issues are issues faced by humanity or a global community of nations. So it is not specific to India. If anything, India has handled its transition towards non-fossil fuel energy far better than many other nations, which is what the IFC report recognizes.
Now, China's rise is actually economic rise specifically has caused a lot of worry in the West. So India also have certain things to worry about China's rise as such. So how are we actually trying to prepare ourselves for a world where China becoming a like we are moving onto a multipolar world also. So
No, I think it is a question that is better posed to the diplomatic community.
no, but as on the economic side, like how we are actually preparing ourselves to fight with our
I
neighbor.
don't think it is a matter of fighting. It is not a trade-off. I think the China came up during a era when the United States and Western countries were prospering. Similarly, it is not a zero-sum game. I think there is enough scope for India to rise even as China's growth rate levels off, because it has now reached a certain level in the GDP where naturally its growth rate will be lower, and India is ready to pick up the baton, and India's growth rate will improve. So I don't see this as a zero-sum game.
Okay. So thanks a lot, sir. Thanks.
You're
a lot
welcome.
for your.
You're welcome.